Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Herbal Basics. Teas, tinctures, and tablets. It's dragging on. We're up to part 4, and there will be a part 5 as well. So in part 4 and part 5, I'm going to be discussing this controversial topic of standardized extracts. So in part 1, we'll be looking at the definition of standardized extracts and their pros and cons. That's what we'll be covering in this presentation. And then next month in part 2, we'll discuss quite complex issues like marker versus active compounds, phytoequivalents. And then what I'll do is I'll describe that there are in fact 3 basic types of standardized extracts and give you examples of those that we commonly use today. So let's start with the definition. Now, standardization is a very broad term. And in fact, a standardized extract is one that's made to a consistent standard. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's what we currently refer to as standardized extracts. It can be just a normal galenical extract as long as it's made to a consistent standard. So it can be quite simple, just like the ratio of the starting herbal raw material to the finished extract, as I just alluded to. So a 4-to-1 extract where 4 kilos of dried herb is extracted to yield a kilo of final extract, that can technically be called a standardized extract because it's made to a particular manufacturing standard, which in this case is the 4-to-1 standard. However, more often though, a standardized extract is one that's manufactured to contain a consistent level of one or more phytochemical constituents. And of course, these are derived from the original starting material in the vast majority of cases, as I'll touch on. So these phytochemical constituents to which a standardized extract is consistently made are referred to as marker compounds. They are not necessarily the active compounds, the things that make the herb act pharmacologically and clinically. However, there is often overlap. It's a complex topic, and I'll be covering that next month. So standardized extracts, are they poison or are they a panacea? This was from many, many years ago, I must add, but I love this quote. It was a herbal practitioner magazine called Herbal Times. It was produced in the UK. And what it says is, we do believe that standardized herbal medicines or extracts are not really herbal medicines at all. They are forms of altered state, partially natural products which a herbalist avoids and which could, for many reasons, a whole topic in itself, spell the end of herbal medicine as we know it, unless what we consider to be true herbalists take a stand against them. So very strong and broad terms. And indeed, I can remember certainly giving lectures at various events around Australia, for example, and having some people in the audience, severely criticize me because I've been promoting these evil standardized extracts. So we do have these conflicting views about standardized extracts. And so let's take a look, firstly, at the pro case. They're a way of ensuring consistent activity of a herbal extract from batch to batch. This is hugely important because if you're treating a patient and they get a good result 1 month, and then you continue the treatment and they come back in the 2nd month, it's not working as well, the last thing you want to be thinking about is whether what you gave them this month has less or different activity to what they had the month before, of course, using the same herbs. Now, this becomes even more important, in fact, absolutely essential when we're dealing with clinical trials. So there's a clinical trial, say, on a herbal extract, 200 people, and it shows a tremendous effect, say, on cognition and brain health. So we want to get that result with our patients. And so we want to use that herb. But it's more than that. We can't just use that herb. We've got to do it at that dose and with an extract that matches what was used in the clinical trial. We can't do that unless we know the absolute characteristics of that extract and how it was standardized. So this is, it's the push, if you like, for clinical trial evidence that has really driven the development of standardized extracts, because we want to be able to replicate those results in the clinic. And so we need a consistent activity. And as part of that, of course, they often have impressive dossiers of safety and efficacy that's backed up by clinical trials. And it's important to point out, and I'll touch on this a bit later, that the standardization is of all the production procedures and parameters, or at least should be, not just to the marker compounds. So you have a consistent raw material, you process it in a consistent way, you test it in a consistent way, and it comes up consistently with levels of marker compounds and therefore presumed consistent clinical activity. And there's another really important point, is because the manufacturers of these extracts are targeting optimal levels of activity, they're often more effective because the manufacturers are selecting the best quality raw materials and rejecting those that don't match their standards. So they're often more effective and more active, better quality than traditional extracts. So what's the con case then? I put up a pretty good argument, I would think. Well, are you actually preferentially selecting or isolating one phytochemical or group of phytochemicals from the herb at the expense of others? So you're not necessarily getting the benefit of the whole herbal extract. And we know that's very important in herbal therapy. As I've said many, many times, the active component is the herbal extract itself, not necessarily marker compound A or marker compound B. So are we selecting and therefore altering the activity of the extract, of the herb, I should say, by this extract? Also, if there's a common marker compound, for example, like caffeine or a flavonoid, for example, unscrupulous manufacturers might be bolstering up the activity of their extracts by adding that pure phytochemical back in. So it's not really truly a herbal extract at all. Often, to get the chemical profile that's sought and indeed the degree of concentration, chemical solvents other than ethanol and water can be used in the process. And this can leave, for example, undesirable residues in the extract. And of course, as you saw from my quote earlier from the Herbal Times, they're seen to represent a reductionist model of herbal therapy. And in a sense, that has some basis, but you can still use standardized extracts in a functional herbal therapy way and avoid that. So you're just using them as arrows, and because they're standardized and have clinical evidence behind them, they're very sharp arrows. So they don't necessarily imply a reductionist practice. So what's the reality of these pros and cons? Well, there are examples of standardized extracts which actually reflect all of these positions, both on the pro and the con side. It's not appropriate to generalize, and we need to consider extracts on a case-by-case basis, and I'll be briefly doing that next month. But it is first necessary to understand the language and concepts associated with these products. So I'm going to touch on some of that now, but again, more detail next month. So we have this very good diagram that I pulled from a scientific, or actually from a book on the topic of herbal bioactive-based drug delivery systems, is the title of the book. And you can see that there are 6 key approaches for herbal standardization. Now, numbers 5 and 6 are more appropriate for example, multi-component herbal products and so on. And we won't go into those. But as you can see, you're using compendial standards, you're using marker-based phytochemistry, and as I mentioned, number 3, you're doing a consistent process, so you have process control markers. And of course, once you've made the extract, you must ensure it's stable, so you have storage standards and testing of stability and all of those things. So it's those 4 key concepts are very important in the appropriate manufacture of standardized extracts. So as I've stressed, it's all about consistent activity of the product from batch to batch. But depending on the circumstances, this might not always be the case. And this can particularly happen if compounds other than the chosen marker compounds turn out to be important for therapeutic activity, and these are not being fixed at consistent levels in the manufacturing process. And in that case, a standardized extract will not achieve consistent activity. So I've just, in this final slide and this final point, touched on the whole complexity behind the appropriateness of standardized extracts. And this will be elaborated further next month in part 2 of this presentation.